updates. That one's locked. Here's one that's not, it's a newsletter that's not locked if you want to read it. Consumers in China are not spending. That's not unusual. Consumers in China don't spend a lot generally. There are many family demographic reasons for that. China is a very expensive place to live compared to what people make. And they have one, under the one-child policy, they don't have a lot of kids. So they need to save for retirement, else they become a huge burden on their family, because China really doesn't provide for its people in terms of retirement, or at least it's kind of, I don't know, I haven't done a concentrated study on that either. I just know from reading that the Social Security is not going to be there for them. In other words, the welfare system is not really going to be there for them. You would think it would be because of China's political origins, it being a communist state and whatnot, but no, it's not. They don't have the money for that. China is a lot less wealthy than you think it is in terms of the government. If you look at it how I do as an insolvency attorney, I look at, what's coming in versus what's going out. You begin to really understand that China is not wealthy at all. In fact, and its spending choices, militarizing the South China Sea, I guess she thinks that's an investment, that will pay off. And maybe that's the way they're going to make money in the future. But no, they are definitely balance sheet compromised in my view. So, but you can read that if you find that more interesting. And here, we were all wondering what was going to happen. Was she or wasn't she going to go to Taiwan? And she did. Boy, did she. So that was, remember that? That was fascinating, wasn't it? I wrote this you can read for free. I call it the Pelosi Challenge. There were a number of people that came down hard on her attempt to visit, but I think they missed the issue. The issue was not that you were going to help U.S.-China relations in some way, and I guess you can argue it was her duty to support U.S.-China relations or what have you. I think what she did was opened the door to, I think it was really for the world. I honestly did. She opened the door for those officials around the world who wanted relations with Taiwan, who wanted to balance things out. Because if you don't balance things out, they should have been balanced out a decade ago, 2 decades ago, right? But we let it go. We let China go. We let China go. We let China go. This was her attempt to turn that back. You may not agree with it. You may not like it, but I understand it. I completely understand it. And I know what she was doing. And it actually worked. It actually worked. Now, we're not done with the whole Taiwan-China issue. Far from it, right? But after she visited, there were delegations. I watch the international press. I don't just read the American press. I don't just read the European press. I read the press. I can read in several languages. So I read, I'm not, super fluent. I'm not trying to brag or anything. I can read in several languages. And what I can't read, I use Google Translate. So there were delegations from all over the world that are heading to Taiwan, where they were afraid to before, because they saw Pelosi calling China's bluff. It was a scary time. It's scary to call China's bluff. She decided she would go, that she took a chance. They made a circuitous, how do you say that word, route, her plane made it didn't go straight to Taiwan because they were afraid of PLA interference for security reasons. But she took a big risk, right? She took it with Taipei's, support, of course. If Taipei didn't want her there, she wouldn't have been there. But after she left, within a matter of days, I think Taipei's agenda was all fleshed out for like the next 6 months. There's delegation after delegation as countries around the world, countries, plural, dozens, are starting to find ways that they can enhance relations with Taiwan. We're talking about European countries. We're talking about Canadian countries, Australians, British, the British certainly, but also Japan. Japan just made a trip to Taiwan, and it, China did its ADIZ run where it enters Taiwan's air defense zone. I'm trying to remember which other countries, but that really is game changing, because if you balance things out, if you don't let China have its way all the time, you stop appeasing China, and the world, you let China know that the world disapproves of what it's doing. If China thinks the world approves because the world wants access to Chinese markets, then it's just gonna take Taiwan. But if China thinks the world doesn't approve, it does help deter. They have to think about it. I still think Xi Jinping plans, fully intends, if he can, to salami slice Taiwan, a part of Taiwan, or to try to take as much of it as he can. But it's going to make him a little bit more hesitant. He's got to figure out a way to do it if the entire world, or if it looks like much of the world, not the entire world. There will still always be, Russia and Hungary. But if it looks like a lot more of the world than he thought before was objecting, which it's starting to look that way, then he's going to be a little more careful. So I thought what she did was great. A lot of people did not. I did. For that reason. As we get into August, we see more struggles for China business. The US is undergoing a significant bipartisan revolution, if you ask me, because apparently China is the only topic on which it can agree. So the Senate is actually quite hawkish on China now these days, as is the House. And it had a Taiwan policy proposal that really did give a lot more support and international recognition to Taiwan, and sort of relegate China lower down on the totem pole than China would be thrilled about. So the White House expressed significant concerns, and but I think that they're still managing to pass much of what was in that policy. We learned a new word, friendshoring, which, yes, you could call it. So there's nearshoring, onshoring, offshoring, friendshoring, right? Friendshoring is when you set up your global business in a country with similar values to you. So if you're an American business and China got you down in more ways than one, whether it's the supply chains or the Xinjiang labor blend, that's part of the supply chain issue, but whether it's zero COVID cramping your supply chains, or the Xinjiang forced labor ban on products that you might be exporting from China to somewhere else, these are things that are not going to necessarily go away anytime soon, and it's causing you to possibly diversify your interest. That might even be a euphemism for some companies. Leave China, it would be the truth in some cases. In other cases, they are diversifying or decentralizing away from China, however you want to put it. Different countries, different industries, different companies all have different objectives, right? But you might find that setting up in an allied country, it makes it sound like war, in a country where the interests and values do not diverge so much from your home countries, so that would leave you at less political risk of legislation, and also less political risk for, you know, control of your company in ways that that wouldn't happen in your home country. China's property debt crisis is really starting to show signs that it's spreading at a very extreme rate through other parts of the economy. In August, it probably was already there in other parts of the economy long before August, but this is the news. So again, this is, I don't know. I rack my brain. It's unprecedented. So I don't know. People say, oh, it's not unprecedented. You know, you had the U.S. No. This kind of debt crisis makes the U.S. financial crisis of 2008 pale in comparison, because the U.S. economy was not founded on real estate. Almost 30% of China's economy is based on the real estate industry, is associated in some way, shape, or form with the real estate industry. Probably more than that. That's what analysts think. So, yeah, it's unprecedented. It's terrifying. It's so terrifying that even Ren Zhengfei is panicking. Yeah, so this one's unlocked if you're interested in seeing what he has to say. The Huawei founder has to say about the nation's economy and about Xi Jinping's common prosperity. He's very, obviously they're very careful. He can't just come right out and criticize things directly, but this was, everyone knew what he was trying to say, and it's a, I guess you call it a veiled criticism. I don't think he said something so harshly direct but it would have still angered Beijing. I can promise you that, because you just don't say anything, right? But if you want to know what was said, you can go to August 26th in the archives, and it's unlocked. You can read that there. More bad news. Yeah, and then there was all the matter of the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights not wanting to release the report that they did on Xinjiang, I guess because she was being pressed so hard by China not to, because it was a damning UN report. It basically even mentioned those three words in it, saying that China, Beijing, was potentially guilty. I'll never forget those words, potentially guilty of crimes against humanity. If that doesn't sort of rock you, then nothing will, So that's big news. And I left that unlocked if you'd like to go read that, with all of the links to the reports and whatnot. Property debt engulfing the Chinese economy. And this is when the US also hits China with some new AI chip restrictions. And here we see Germany back in the news, still struggling, right? So German government is having a hard time turning around Merkel's policies of engagement with Beijing, because that is the status quo, and German business likes the status quo. Well, not all German business, but some of the most powerful German businesses, especially that auto industry, but not all, only the auto industry, really liked the status quo. So they're having a tough time making those changes. October was a very interesting month. lots of developments reported on. You see here at the beginning of the month that Dealmakers, these are merger and acquisition Dealmakers, were looking to India as China growth wanes. And I think I saw an update like last week or a couple of weeks ago that said that the merger, the M&A transactions were that were taking place in India were outpacing those in China these days. Probably a lot of that to do with zero COVID. So that's interesting. Another thing that happened was that the U.S. Senate voted to condition the ratification of the Montreal Protocol, which is an environmental treaty, on removing China as a developing country. So they did vote by a landslide to remove China's status as a developing country because, you know, you get a lot more allowances for carbon and greenhouse gases as a developing country than you do as a non-developing country. Senator Sullivan took to the floor. He made a very I think a very good speech about that. Here are some of his remarks. And if you, I don't know if this news, if I can send you the link if you want, but some of his remarks were, I cited them here. There's an element of this treaty that raises a principle that is at stake right now, he said, so important with regard to China, the US, and the rest of the world. The treaty continues to classify China as a developing country. Why does that matter? It's a facade. China is not a developing country. China is the second largest economy in the world. China is one of the most industrialized countries in the world. China has one of the biggest militaries in the world. The World Bank now even considers China to be an upper middle income country. But what China keeps trying to do in international organizations and in international treaties is to continue to get the same benefits afforded to truly developing countries. So, my analysis, my take on this was opening up a can of worms that would not be good for China, because even though the Montreal Protocol Amendment is seen as largely symbolic, I said here, China Boss thinks its overwhelming support in the Senate could set the stage for a similar effort at the World Trade Organization, and that is more impactful, much more impactful than the Montreal Protocol. Changing China's developing country status at the WTO would require politically controversial reforms to the rules by which the 164-member body operates, not least of which would include adding a standard definition to classify member countries rather than permitting self-declared status, as the organization does now, for special and differential treatment in global trade. However, in light of China's diplomatic support for Putin's attack on Ukraine and its escalating threat against Taiwan, China Boss thinks that U.S. trade envoys might have a little easier of a time petitioning other WTO members like India and the EU, for instance. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, but there's been new border clashes between India and China. So India is not happy at all. India's Prime Minister Modi is under serious pressure at home to come down hard on Beijing. So I think you're going to see even more willingness on the part of India to share position, so to speak, where they haven't before on China issues with the West. So yeah, that's something to watch. Also in October, you see an update that I wrote citing a Taiwanese defense minister who says that Taiwan has made the adjustment now about treating new Chinese airspace incursion as a first strike. This is actual airspace, not the ADIZ, but the airspace. And the reason that they said that is they had gotten drone interference prior to this into their actual airspace. So they are very anxious A drone can be used many ways. And it could be surveillance only, or it could actually, as you've probably seen from the war in Ukraine, be used to blow something up or damage or hurt civilian lives. So this is, I think, very important. I think it, on several levels, it shows escalation in the Taiwan Straits. It shows how nervous Taiwan is. It shows how serious the crisis is. You can't really, yes, it's tough. I understand. Hotspots are hotspots for a reason, and sometimes they're cooler than other times, and so you start to get used to maybe the risk, but you can also become too used to the risk, which I think the Taiwanese people on some level are. And then you begin to not notice when the risk has escalated or elevated to an extremely dangerous point. Is it there now? I don't know. I'm not an expert on Taiwan-China relations. I just watch the news on it as much as I can. But I feel that for the Taiwanese government, which has the responsibility of protecting its citizens, I feel like they are under a great deal of stress, and they really are at wit's end for how to better defend their borders. And so it might be seen as a cry for help, or it just might be seen as a warning to China. It's probably both. But here, the official Qiu Guoqiang, I think that would be, I understand Pinyin, Roma Pinyin better than the Taiwanese Bopomofo, but he said, in the past, we said we won't be the first to strike, which means we won't do it without them firing artillery shells or missiles, etc. first. But now the definition has changed, he said, as China used means like drones, so we have adjusted, and from henceforth will view any crossing of aircraft or vessels as a first strike. So that comment was made to local lawmakers' question about recent drone flights, again, over Taiwanese-controlled islands located off the Chinese coast. So if you'd like to read this, anything you'd like to read, if it's locked, just send me a short message and I will send you a copy. But the rest of October, you might say, belongs to Xi Jinping. And why? Well, that was when the 20th Party Congress took place. They moved it up this year. That was interesting in and of itself. There are several reasons they may have moved it up. The Bali Summit, where a lot was happening diplomatically, was going to take place in November. And then, at the same time, if Xi had maybe left the party for longer, it might have been a little bit tougher for him to negotiate everything that he really wanted. As it was, the party did pull back. It didn't give him every single thing that he wanted, but the economy was tanking. It still is tanking. I think it's collapsing, honestly. It doesn't mean that it might not be stopped from a total collapse. I hope that it is. But everything that I've seen coming out of the mainland, it just indicates to me you've got a serious economic problem right now. And then I think I've always known that COVID in China has been out of control. The question is not whether China had unreal numbers of COVID infection. The question was whether how well the local party chiefs are able to cover them up. Also, people don't really want to admit that they have COVID because they will be taking off away from their family and friends and work. They will be lose income because they will be quarantined for God knows how long, hopefully only 2 weeks, but it could, I mean, people have been left in quarantine for much longer than that in China, and those and the quarantine centers that they have, depending on where they are, they're not very sanitary. People get sick and have to go to hospital from those, you name it. They're not nice places, right? So so anyway, there's a very there's a lot of motivation to not tell the truth about COVID in China, starting with the basic individual on up into, you know, these party leaders who are struggling against each other to prove their, she thought, credentials and show him just how well they can control the pandemic, air quotes, control, right? It's absolutely absurd. So anyway, you've got, but at the current time, Omicron was exploding. And we know this now. We can see the morgues filling up with people in Beijing. We can see that China's actually stopped counting or redefined what a COVID infection is because the numbers are just too high. And it can't withstand, or it can't stand up to those numbers and explain, you know, the lack of preparation of its hospitals. It had 3 freaking years to prepare those hospitals. You can't, you know, so this is a policy failure, right? So all of this is happening at the same time, you know, as this party congress. COVID wasn't just recently out of control. COVID has been out of control for months, if not years, but really, really, really bad, at least since the summer. And so all of this, the party knows, all of this Xi Jinping knows. So, you know, one interpretation of why they changed the date is that to leave it longer subjected him to more political, you know, compromises in terms of negotiations. He was probably always assured his 3rd term. That's what most people think and most experts think, but he may not be able to get everything he wants. It does weaken his position a great deal. And so that's it. Then there's the Bali summit that he wants to attend. He doesn't want to leave the country without clenching that 3rd term first, wants to make sure to get that out of the way. So I think those were the reasons that the Congress was moved up. I wrote something on that. It was an update, and I think that it's not. Wait. Let me go see. Yeah, here it is. This is I guess for me the most important thing that came out of the 20th Party Congress is that they have removed the language, the party has removed the language of peace and development from its goals and objectives. So you see here, Chris Buckley reported at the New York Times last week that the slogans peace and development have been removed from the messaging at the 20th Party Congress. Their exclusion and Mr. Xi's somber warning of dangerous storms on the horizon indicate she believes international hazards have worsened. This slogan's been around for decades. Longer than 2 decades. Peace and development remains themes of the era. You know, this goes back to sort of Deng's strategy of biding your time, and well, she says no more. We're not biding our time anymore. Essentially, it's what's happened. Oh, yeah. I mean, did the world always move like this? You know, I don't think it did. I really don't. The world is always a very volatile place, but I just feel like since COVID, it has become a lot more volatile. I'm wrong, but this is pretty significant for me. And again, this particular update isn't locked, so you can freely access it on Substack. It's the October the 28th update that I wrote if you want to read more about what happened at the Party Congress.